Let's continue. If you're new here, you could go to the trailer, and if you're lost, you can go to the table of contents. In this video, the obviously about the ketogenic diet, the bottom line, it's amazing for some people. It's just stunning results. The research on this is pretty early. I'll show you just a couple small trials and some of their results. It's clear that sticking to the diet is difficult, but when people get huge gains, that's really motivating and that's really important. So I think this is a tool that's important to understand, and it also gives us insight into what causes bipolar disorder. And I have a separate video on that I'll link at the end. I think you'll be more interested in that when you see what this ketogenic diet can do. So what does ketogenic mean in this diet context? Well, just as a hybrid car can run on two different fuels, electricity or gas, the brain can run on two different fuels, glucose, which is a form of sugar, or ketones, which is a form of fat. Now, when electricity runs low in a car, it can switch over to the gas engine to supply the power. And electricity, that switch happens because it's harder to store a whole lot of power in terms of electricity. And the brain is kind of like that. It's harder for the body to store a whole lot of power as glucose. So the supplies can run low sometimes, and the body is designed to be able to cope with that by switching over to using ketones as fuel. The body does this because there's basically plenty of fuel in that tank to make the ketones. And we originally evolved in conditions where running out of fuel, like being in a starvation situation, was relatively common. The body needed to be able to cope with that, including especially supplying fuel to the brain, again, in the form of these ketones, this form of fat. Well, it turns out that running your brain on ketones has an anti-mood cycling effect and an antipsychotic effect that is really dramatic. Um, we know this from multiple case reports, basically people describing their experience. It's really quite profound. The research on this is just getting underway. So exactly what percentage of people who attempt to do this will get that result, that's not fully established yet, but there's really no question that stunning results can be had. And the mechanism by which this happens, the basic chemistry of it, is remarkably well understood now. It's one of the really exciting advances in the understanding of bipolar mood shifts. All those little chemical steps that you see in this diagram, I've tried to explain those in plain English in a separate video that I'll link at the end of this one. In terms of benefits, this is a quote from one person who was in one of those studies. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for keto. So what is this diet? Well, I'll just give you the really short version because there's plenty of this out there on the internet. Um, Carbohydrates are needed in our diet in order to synthesize, to create glucose and store it and have it available to our brain. Carbohydrates can come in relatively simple forms like the goodies you see at the bottom there, or more complex forms that take longer to enter your bloodstream and don't pick up insulin so much. So are basically as a form of carbohydrates are preferred over the good stuff that has been designed by our food industry to tantalize us. When none of those carbohydrates or very, very few are available for about 24 hours, the body switches over to using this, to synthesizing ketones from its fat stores and using those in the brain. This metabolic state is called ketosis, which is a handy term you'll see in just a minute. And it's possible to maintain this ketotic state, ketosis, by continuing to consume a diet very low in carbohydrates that forces the brain to continue to run on ketones. So how doable is this? Well, here's one of the studies from across the Atlantic, from the United States over in the UK, and some members of the team were from Europe as well. Um, and let's see how they do. Here are the results of ketosis for the 20 people who were in this study. Uh, Bottom line here, about 7 of the 20 were able to be in a ketotic state about 95% of the time. The graph, dark green is deep ketosis, light green is the target state, which was moderate ketosis. Yellow is light ketosis, and all of this is measured with direct laboratory measurements, obviously, um, and red is not ketotic. Here's a quote from one of the participants in that study who said, liked working with a research dietitian. That was fantastic. Great support. I don't think people could really do this sensibly without that kind of support. It's hard. Well, that's right. It's hard. So this is one point of view. On the other hand, you have the proponents of ketogenic diet saying, look, if you get a great result, and it can happen really quickly within days, that will really help give you the motivation that it requires to stick with this. So important to hang on to both of those ideas. Here's another team that's working on this at Stanford in California in the US. They had 21 participants in this study. 1/3 of them weren't able to reach the ketosis goals. But for those who did get to their goals, 90% had a really big improvement. 90%, we don't see that in psychiatric research very often. So in summary, again, that balance, it's hard to do, but when it works, it's really amazing. And the research on this is just getting underway, so we'll know more about ways to help people do it and what percentage of people can, with the right sets of circumstances, achieve these really amazing results. There's more on that, how this works in the metabolism video from the What Causes Bipolar playlist, and more on using what you eat as a treatment with an everyday eating plan that's not so difficult to pursue in the everyday eating video.